Assalamu alaikum, I'm Laila Nisar. This is Awaz English and you're watching Awaz Expressway. From rising temperatures and deadly heat waves to the doubling of climate-related court cases, the impact of climate change is undeniable. The world is seeing an alarming rise in global temperatures and an increasing number of legal battles as people and nations fight back against climate change. The urgency for action is more critical than ever, especially for those in vulnerable regions. When people burn carbon, whether from coal in power plants or gasoline in vehicles, it creates carbon dioxide. Now, this invisible gas builds up in the atmosphere and traps the sun's warmth near the Earth's surface, leading to what we know as climate change. It is also noteworthy that lawsuits on climate inaction are increasing. The latest UNEP Global Climate Litigation Report reveals that number of climate court cases has more than doubled since 2017, showing a growing worldwide effort to address this crisis through legal means. Additionally, research indicates that 3.6 billion people already live in areas which are highly susceptible to climate change. Between 2030 and 2050, it is expected to cause approximately more than 200,000 additional deaths per year due to undernutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. Countries with weak health infrastructure, primarily in developing regions, will struggle the most with external help to prepare and respond effectively. So for further discussion, I'm joined by Professor Gabriel Filippelli, who is the professor at Department of Earth Environmental Sciences at Indiana University and also the Executive Director at Environmental Resilience Institute. So hello, Professor. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being here with us. Professor, I've done several shows with you. We have discussed the basics of climate change several times with you. But now I'd like to know, what is the widely accepted climate change theory? Is it generally accepted, or you think that it's controversial? If you want to shed some light on it.
Yeah, so we had a pretty good understanding of what drives climate change for decades now, and at least in a theoretical standpoint. We know that our climate changes on Earth naturally from changes in the amount of carbon in our atmosphere, so carbon dioxide, but we have kind of supercharged that over the last 150 years by burning fossil fuels and emitting a lot of carbon into our atmosphere. So what we would expect based on physics is the planet would warm. And in fact, that's what we've been seeing.
Professor, this year COP, Conference of the Parties, happened. It happens almost every year. I'd like to know the reasons that countries like United States and also Brazil, they did not sign the charter at the end. Is that so? What could be the reasons for that?
Yeah, so there's probably several reasons to that, but one of them has to do with details, I think, of the arrangements and decisions that came out of COP at the very end of negotiation. And so, you know, I have a certain view toward COP. I think it's a very useful platform to communicate globally about needs to confront the climate crisis. I think that the U.S. does take it quite seriously, depending on the administration, of course. And as a consequence, the U.S. remains committed to contributing to the Loss and Damage Fund, which is a key part of a key outcome of COP over the last couple years. That fund is too small, and the commitment is not obligatory. It's voluntary. But over the years, the U.S. has contributed to that fund either directly or indirectly. So I don't know about the inside machinations about why the U.S. didn't sign at the very end. But you know, I suspect and I feel very strongly that we are committed.
Right. Okay. So what do you think of the governments they are doing regarding climate change? Do you find them serious enough? Because all the time they're being noticed asking people to stay hydrated, drink water. Do you think that this is enough, what our governments are doing, or you think that they should do more than that?
They really have to do more than that. I mean, that's fine, the message, stay cool and stay hydrated. But if you are an outside laborer, that's not very easy to do. If you don't have the money to have an air conditioning system in your home, which not many houses do globally, really, it's very difficult to stay cool. So we certainly hear this message even in the U.S., but it has to be augmented with two things. One is obviously we need to reduce carbon emissions. So we need to slow down this heat as much as possible. But of course, that takes a while. In the meantime, I think that we need to
Right.
really invest in keeping people cool and safe during these massive heat waves.
Right. Professor, we are witnessing this year certain events that we have not witnessed before. Like if you see during this time of Hajj pilgrimage, the Hajj pilgrims, they died while performing Hajj. And this has never happened before. So what do you think of such events? Do you think that by 2050, such events, they're going to be really difficult? It is going to become very difficult for people to perform such activities?
Well, I'm worried. Yes, I am worried about that. Okay, so this particular Hajj came at a time where it's also particularly hot, right? So sometimes the timing of these heat waves coincides with some of these events, in which case tragic outcomes arrive. I don't think that's going to be the case every year, but certainly we know that the temperature will keep going up and up and up unless we, of course, do a lot more to mitigate that. So in the meantime, what we think about a lot is what we call climate resilience. So if people are participating in this very important religious and cultural event, we need to make sure that we recognize that they might be vulnerable to heat exhaustion and provide cooling stations or adequate hydration along the way.
Right, right. Professor, do you think that satellites, they also do damage ozone layer? Like currently the Starlink is being criticized for that. What is the background?
Yeah, so we have so many satellites up
Yeah.
there, and what we've now
We've got dead
known.
satellites too in the space.
Yeah. So what they do is many of them are in the very upper part of the stratosphere, and the stratosphere has this layer, which you just recognize, the ozone layer, which is really critical to reducing ultraviolet radiation on Earth. We've already made it a little bit more vulnerable by emitting a lot of chemicals, these chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs. We have now have bans on that, but nevertheless, the ozone layer is teetering on the edge of stability. And now we have these Starlink satellites and other small satellites disturbing the natural reformation of ozone. And so it's a concern.
Right, right. Uh, Professor, when it comes to climate change or about its adaptation or mitigation, what do you have to comment about the rich countries or the developed countries? Do you think that, or we can say that, why don't they finance the poor countries or the developing countries when it comes to mitigation and adaptation?
They should. That's on us. I mean, frankly, I think a lot of countries have this, obviously they have to also, their governments have to speak for their voters, and
Right.
voters and citizens tend to be a little bit more inward facing than global facing. But here we've come to the challenge, right? The planet isn't made up of independent nations that can do whatever they want and control their own climate, for example. The
Right.
climate is a global phenomenon, right? And so we have to start thinking of this as there's this concept called the global commons, which is that we are all responsible. In fact, the Western countries are far more responsible for current climate change than any other country around, right? So we need to do our fair share, not just within our own footprint of our country, but also to countries that have very little contribution to past and current climate change, but are suffering pretty horrendously.
Thank you, Professor, for being with us. That's all for today. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Awaz English.